He wore a forbidden badge every day, not for glory, but for a promise. Welcome to the channel. If you're here, it's because stories speak to your heart, and this one just might stay with you long after it ends. Before we begin, take a second to hit that subscribe button so you won't miss tomorrow's special story. And I'd love to know, where in the world are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Every view, every message helps this small storytelling corner grow into something truly beautiful. Now get comfortable, because today's story is one that deserves to be heard in silence. That's what people often think when they look at a queen's guard. A motionless figure in a red tunic, tall bearskin hat, eyes fixed straight ahead, seemingly untouched by time, weather, or distraction. Tourists laugh, wave, take selfies, even test the limits, whispering, snapping fingers, trying to get a reaction. But behind that silence, behind the discipline, there is still a man, and every man carries a story. He stands outside Buckingham Palace 5 days a week from dawn to dusk, unmoving. But beneath the polished buttons and white gloves, something pulses quietly. A memory. Not a thought he tries to ignore, but rather one he chooses to carry. It's not a burden, it's a promise. No one walking by would know that just under this rigid uniform, close to his heart, he keeps a small silver badge. It's not part of the official dress code, in fact, it breaks it. But no one has ever questioned him about it. Perhaps they don't notice. Or perhaps they understand. Some rules aren't written. That badge once belonged to his younger brother, Michael, a Royal Marine, killed in action during the Falklands conflict when he was only 20. A boy, barely out of school, thrown into the chaos of war before he even had time to figure out who he was. The kind of boy who cracked jokes during drills and gave away his rations to new recruits just to make them feel welcome. The kind of brother who used to write him letters saying, "One day, I'll come stand next to you at that palace." But that day never came. So now, every morning before the sun rises over London's grey skyline, this soldier dresses not just in uniform, but in memory. He buttons up duty over grief. He tightens his belt with the steadiness of ritual. And, as he steps into his post, it's not the crowd he's thinking of, not the schedule, not the code. It's Michael. People think being a Queen's Guard is about standing still, but really it's about what you stand for. He doesn't flinch when someone shouts. He doesn't react when someone laughs. But if you look closely, closer than most do, you might see something in his posture, a kind of stillness that's not empty but full of meaning, of respect, of something that has nothing to do with royalty and everything to do with love. He never told anyone about the badge, not his superiors, not his friends. He just started wearing it the year after Michael died. Quietly, reverently. He wears it not to be seen but to remember. And in the end, isn't that what we all want? To keep the people we love close, in whatever way we can? For some, it's a photo on a desk. For others, a familiar scent, a song, a letter. For him, it's a badge tucked inside a uniform, hidden in plain sight just over the place where his brother's heart once beat. So the next time you see a soldier standing still, remember, silence doesn't mean emptiness. Stillness doesn't mean numbness. Some of the heaviest stories are carried in the quietest moments, and sometimes the people who seem the most unreadable are the ones with the most to say. He never expected anyone to notice. The badge was small, old, worn at the edges like a coin passed down through too many hands. It wasn't polished like the brass buttons lining his chest. It didn't reflect sunlight or shine under the palace lights. It just sat there, tucked under the second layer of his uniform, clipped inside the lining of his tunic, close enough to feel but hidden enough to forget. At least that's what he thought. Until one day a man in the crowd lowered his camera after taking a photo, squinted, and stared just a little longer than usual. The soldier didn't flinch. He never did. But a flicker of awareness passed through him. Something about the way that stranger looked at him wasn't like the others. It wasn't curiosity. It wasn't entertainment. It was recognition. He brushed it off, like he always did. Another face in a sea of tourists. But 3 days later, a small envelope was waiting for him in the mailroom. No return address, just a printed note. I saw it. I think I know what it means. And if I'm right, thank you. Folded inside the note was a photo. The soldier standing tall at his post. And there it was, barely visible, a sliver of silver peeking out from beneath the edge of his collar. His breath caught. Someone had seen it. The badge. He had worn it every day since the funeral, quietly, without ceremony. No one in command ever asked, and he never offered. It wasn't about rebellion. It wasn't some secret cause or statement. It was personal. It was grief, carried in the shape of metal. The badge had once been pinned to Michael's rucksack. It went with him through the Falklands, through the sand and the sea spray, through patrols and sleepless nights. After the IED, it was one of the only things left untouched. The family got it back in a sealed envelope, along with folded flags and scripted condolences. He remembered opening it in the kitchen, his mother sobbing in another room. The badge in his hand felt heavier than it should have, like it had soaked up everything Michael had endured, like it remembered, and that's why he couldn't leave it in a drawer. He sewed a pocket inside his uniform by hand. No one noticed. No one needed to. That badge didn't need an audience. But now someone had seen it. A stranger, standing in a crowd outside Buckingham Palace, had noticed something meant to be invisible, and for a moment, it shook him. Because maybe, just maybe, Michael had been seen too. He carried that envelope back to his barracks in silence, laid the note on his bunk, read it again. 3 lines. No name, no explanation. Just enough to say, I see you. The next morning he dressed as always, pulled on the red tunic, polished the buttons, laced the boots, and then he reached for the badge, not with routine but with something different, gratitude. Because while the badge wasn't part of the uniform, it was part of the man, and maybe, in this strange, quiet way, it had become part of something even greater. Not a symbol of rank or service, but of remembrance, of the love between brothers, of the things we carry not for show but because we have no other choice. Some uniforms are made of cloth, others of memory. After Michael's funeral, the house was too quiet. No footsteps, no late-night humming in the hallway. Just silence. A kind of silence that didn't offer peace, only reminders. Every room held echoes. Every drawer, every photo frame, every uniform still in the closet. He remembered standing in front of his parents that evening, still in his own fatigues. His mother had red eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "You'll stay with us now, won't you?" she asked. He nodded. Then, but he didn't mean it. That night he packed a small bag, took only what he needed, left a note on the kitchen table with one line, "I'll finish what he started." He didn't know exactly what that meant at the time, only that the thought of going back to a normal life felt wrong. He didn't want comfort. He didn't want noise or distraction. He wanted purpose. And so, he made a decision. Not to join the Marines like Michael had. That felt too close, too painful. But he knew one thing. If he couldn't stand beside his brother in combat, he would stand in his place somewhere that mattered. That's how he ended up in the Queen's Guard. People don't realize it's not just pageantry. Behind the ceremony, the drill, the discipline, it's real military service, it's commitment, it's pain, it's pride. Every movement, every detail has to be perfect. Not for applause, but for the tradition, for the memory. His first day in training, his instructor barked at him for his posture. "You don't get to grieve here," the man shouted. He didn't respond, but in his head he thought, "That's exactly why I'm here." Grief wasn't something he needed to get rid of. It was something he needed to give shape to. And the Guard, rigid, unforgiving, ritualistic, gave it form. They rise at dawn. They polish brass until it blinds. Press uniforms with military precision. A single speck of lint can get you reprimanded. They train not just to stand still, but to endure. Weather, time, disrespect, pain. He endured them all, because to him this wasn't just a job. It was a vow A vow that Michael's name wouldn't fade with folded flags or memorial plaques. That, every hour he stood still, unmoving in the cold or the heat, would be a quiet offering, a living memorial, a continuation. He didn't need to tell anyone. He didn't need anyone to understand. But each time his boots clicked against the palace stones, he imagined Michael walking beside him. Sometimes, in the earliest hours, before the gates opened and before the cameras rolled in, he would close his eyes and whisper softly, "Still here, little brother, still standing." Some might say it's just symbolism, just sentiment. But grief changes your wiring. It turns ritual into survival, and for him that red tunic and tall bearskin hat weren't just tradition. They were armor. Armor against forgetting. Armor against letting go too soon. He didn't serve for the crown. Not really. He served for a boy with too much laughter in his eyes and not enough years in his life. A boy who believed the world could still be good, even in the middle of a battlefield. And maybe that's why he stood so straight. So still, because if Michael had lived, he would have done the same for someone else, and now he would do it for him. It happened on an ordinary Tuesday. The sky was overcast, like it often is in London. Rain hung in the air but never quite fell. The crowds were the usual mix: tourists with cameras, families on holiday, school kids pointing at uniforms like they were characters from a storybook. He stood at his post, unmoving as always, arms locked, jaw tight. The badge pressed softly into his chest, hidden behind stitched layers of red wool and silent devotion. He never expected anyone to see it, but from the corner of his eye, he caught something. A man, not young, not old, wasn't looking at the uniform. He wasn't taking photos, he wasn't laughing or waving like the others. He was watching. Their eyes never met, but he felt it. A different kind of attention, not curiosity, not mockery, something deeper, something knowing. The man stood there for several minutes, said nothing, then nodded, just once, and walked away. By the time his shift ended, the moment had almost slipped from his mind. Almost. The next morning, tucked between barracks mail and routine, notices was a small envelope. No name, no address, just his own written in firm, neat letters. Inside was a single photograph, him standing at his post, and in the image, just barely visible beneath the edge of his tunic, was the sliver of silver. The badge. Folded into the photo was a handwritten note. "I served in '82. I know that badge. I lost a brother, too. You're not alone." He stared at the paper for a long time. The sounds of the barracks faded. His bunk, his boots, the hum of fluorescent lights, all of it melted away. All that remained was the photo, the badge, and a stranger's handwriting. Someone had seen him. Really seen him. Not the uniform, not the posture, but the reason behind it all. He didn't realize how much he needed that until it happened. For years he'd carried Michael's memory like a silent flame, careful not to let the world blow it out. But now someone else was carrying their own version of that same fire. And somehow, across time, across different wars and different uniforms, those flames had found each other. That night he sat on his bunk longer than usual, pulled out a box from under his bed. Inside were Michael's letters, old photos, a pair of dog tags, and a folded envelope that still smelled faintly of dust and heat. He opened it. It was Michael's last letter, written 2 days before he died. In it, he talked about coming home, about seeing the world, about standing next to his brother at Buckingham Palace. Just once, even as a tourist, he wrote. Now he would never get that chance. But the soldier, sitting on that bunk, he had it, he was living it. And for the first time, the weight of standing still every day felt lighter. Not because the pain had faded, but because now he knew someone else understood. Someone out there had looked past the pageantry, past the hat, past the rules. They'd seen the badge, they'd seen the story, and in that moment, the silence he had clung to for so long cracked. Just a little. Because maybe, just maybe, grief doesn't always need to be hidden. Maybe Sometimes, it just needs to be recognized, even by a stranger, especially by a stranger. He didn't tell anyone about the letter, not his commanding officer, not his unit, not even the quiet friend 2 bunks over who had served in Helmand and still flinched in his sleep. Some things don't need to be shared loudly. Some moments aren't made for headlines or medals or standing ovations. They're made for silence. And he knew now that silence could be enough. He folded the letter carefully and placed it inside the same box that held Michael's photo. Then he sat on the edge of his bunk, elbows on his knees, staring at the floor like it might speak back. For years he had stood alone in his grief, even among brothers in arms, even surrounded by tradition. He had built walls, not out of bitterness, but to protect the one thing he couldn't afford to lose. The memory of his brother that still felt warm, still felt alive. But all it took was one stranger, one man who had walked the same path, who had buried his own brother, who knew what that badge meant without needing to ask. One person to say, "I see you," and it shifted something in him. Because he hadn't been looking for recognition, he wasn't trying to be seen, but being seen anyway, by someone who understood, without explanation, felt like breathing after holding your breath for too long. He didn't start telling the story to everyone after that. He didn't pin the badge on the outside of his coat. He didn't post about it or share it with the press. That wasn't the point. What changed wasn't how he wore the badge, but how he carried it. He no longer saw it as just a memory. He saw it as a connection, a bridge between 2 brothers and now between 2 strangers. After that day, his shifts felt different. The cold still bit through his boots. The sun still scorched his neck during summer parades. The tourists still shouted, still posed, still waved. But somewhere in the crowd, now and then, he'd look up, not to react, but to check, to wonder. Maybe someone else is out there. Maybe someone else needs to know they're not alone. And if they catch the silver glint of the badge, if they tilt their head and pause for just a second, that would be enough, because not everything needs to go viral. Not every story needs millions of likes or comments or subscribers. Sometimes the smallest acknowledgments carry the loudest truth. You don't need the world to understand your pain. You just need one person who gets it, who doesn't ask why you keep wearing the same old badge, who doesn't ask why your eyes drift when a parade song hits the wrong chord, who doesn't need you to explain why standing still means so much. Just one person to say, "You're not invisible," and the person you lost, they're not forgotten. And maybe, in a world full of noise and distraction and fast-forgotten moments, that's the most human thing of all. To carry someone's memory quietly, to wear it, not on your sleeve, but right over your heart, to keep showing up, to keep standing tall, to keep your promise, even if only one person ever sees it, even if it's just you. If this story touched something in you, whether it reminded you of someone you've lost, someone you miss, or someone you carry in your heart, we'd love to hear from you. Take a moment and share in the comments. Have you ever worn something, an object, a memory, a promise, that no one else saw, but meant everything to you? Or maybe you've been that one person who noticed something small in someone else, and it mattered. Tell us where you're watching from, and if you've ever had a silent connection with a stranger, one of those rare, quiet moments where no words were needed, but everything was understood. These aren't just stories we tell to pass the time. They're stories that remind us we're human, that we grieve, we remember, and we stand for each other. So leave a comment, even just a few words. You never know who might read it and feel a little less alone. And if you haven't already, subscribe to join us tomorrow, because the next story might be the one you didn't know you needed to hear.